A big thank you and welcome again, Winston, for joining us. This is now your second time, and you said that you would come back on and talk a little bit more about what RS is doing, because I think the first time we spoke, it was all quite new with the buying of ISAMs and so on. So yeah, so welcome back.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to be here. Yeah, looking forward to getting your quiz.
I don't try and I definitely don't try and trip anyone up, I hope, anyway. But it is definitely a bit more of a quiz. I agree. Since we last spoke, it seems so much has been going on. And actually, I've sort of noticed more recently, and I actually also joined the Gym Night sort of seminar. But you've been doing a lot more activity, trying to sort of, I suppose, build up that awareness what RS is doing. And actually a lot of that sort of thought leadership piece, which actually some of it I find really interesting, because some of it is things which I think I also have been sort of thinking about and feeling needs to happen in the education sector. But there's also it's also wider than that as well. And you've been pulling it out from schools and people you've been sort of speaking to. So I think that's been really interesting, that you sort of are doing a lot more thought leadership pieces, probably more so than lots of other companies at the moment in the sort of MIS space especially.
Yeah, I think last time we spoke, we said that this was buying ISAMs really was a completion of our wider portfolio. And now that we have finance products, we've got our engagement products with things like parent mail, and now our MIS with ISAMs for the independent school sector and EdGen as the brand for the state sector. We've really focused on how do we bring that all together? How do we go out to market? How do we reinforce and validate our education credentials? How do we actually position ourselves as not just a software company that you can buy great software from, obviously, but also put a lot more effort into finding out what customers are actually doing, where they're struggling, where that thought leadership piece, surveying customers, working with people like EdExec, with charities and organizations around wellbeing, with a wide range of people, just to really get a better understanding of what's going on in the market, what the issues that are affecting people, particularly during COVID, where obviously the whole way we teach, the whole way that people have used technology has changed quite radically. So glad you've noticed it. That's really good to hear. And yeah, expect to see more of it. I think lots of what we are doing in the space is that relationship building and that listening piece, and then using that to drive innovation through our software, obviously, but also using it to share that intelligence and that information with wider people, because I think there's a big opportunity for actually people to feel like they're not alone in what's going on, and also to find out how other people are being successful in that space. So the whole community piece is a big focus for us.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think ultimately, I think the whole idea of sharing good practice and sharing people's thinking, where that could be leaders within the school, but also mat leaders and into the wider community of as you did with Gym Night and so on. Where are the people who are future gazing, I guess, about what might happen into the future, but actually sharing that, I think, is really, really good. I think that's a strong position to be in, as that sort of key thought leader, but also making sure other businesses and other people can also be bought into that, and at least everyone's moving in the same direction as well. When there's lots of information that's being held, I think sometimes you get to the situation where different businesses and different maybe a massive misconnect, I think is probably a better way of looking at it, between maybe education and some of the ed tech companies.
Yeah, and I think we definitely believe in that. So we are open, transparent. That's the ethos that we've got. That's the culture we built through the business over the last few years to try and make all the information that we have available to everyone. And that ethos of we're in it together. We want to build something that actually makes a difference. We've I think since we last spoke, we've redone our 3-year plan as a business, and made our mission about changing the life chances of students and having an impact on all students across the UK education system and wider. So actually that ethos, that cultural imperative is set from the top of the organization, and that's why you're starting to see us not just talk about software and technology, but talk about some of the issues that are appearing, and folks like Jim, who's a great advocate and great sponsor of feeding into that story, are really helping us with thinking about things from different perspectives.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Actually, before we go on to the Jim, because I would like to ask you a question in relation, well, a couple of questions in relation to that seminar, which I sort of picked up on, and I also published that I'd ask you the questions, so I probably should. It's one of those moments where you go, I better ask that question, seeing I said I would. But the actual paper itself, the white paper, I thought it was quite interesting, because it may not be a surprise to many people, and it probably isn't, but I think that some of the key sort of points that came from it were, you know, very much along the lines of time and funding. So it came up in the seminar as well. You know, time and funding is critical in relation to, you know, what schools are going through and what MATs are going through. And when I did the interview with Rowena Hackman, who's Astria, Matt, you know, ultimately, and Jeff Marshall as well, they both were very much along the lines of, you know, almost don't come to us with a proposition unless it basically says, you know, here's 25 grand for another teacher, or 35 grand for another teacher. You know, you basically, it's going to be hard to get through the door, because we are literally that sort of hamstrung in relation to what we can purchase. So I think that's quite important, and I think it's quite it's been quite interesting to see where so you've written the white paper, what sort of things, you know, how does that translate, I guess, from what RS is doing. You also got safeguarding in there, which is really quite important focus as well.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a lot around MATs as well, because obviously MATs are going to be the future. There's no doubt about it. You know, there's no stopping the government. The government aren't reducing or relaxing the pressure they're putting on schools to move to academisation, or going under a MAT especially as well. And I think ultimately the MATs are just going to get bigger rather than more MATs potentially. But, you know, where does RS sit amongst all this, you know, based on your white paper?
Yeah, lots of questions in there.
Yeah, sorry.
That's right. So I think you're right that there wasn't any immediate surprises around things like funding. I think one of the challenges with the funding piece is that it's been talked about for so long and for so many years now that actually people are almost a bit blasé, a bit ambivalent to the impact of it. But I think certainly what the paper and what the survey highlighted was it's still as big an issue and as pressing an issue as it ever has been, if not more so, as we know that schools have dipped into their reserves to manage the impact of COVID, and are continuing to dip into reserves to manage the impact of COVID. So I think funding remains a hot topic, will forever remain a hot topic, and I think getting the right angle on how to then deal with that to stop it becoming just a broken record and just a repeat phrase is really important, which is why we asked a few questions around time, because certainly a lot of the evidence that we've seen over the last year has been around how can you give me time back, and that's not necessarily time back for doing more work, right? None of us really want to do that, but time back for getting the balance right for teachers, or time back for making sure that what I'm doing is much more efficient, or time back in how do I reduce the gap between something going into a system and me being able to do something useful from it. So we've focused a lot more as a result of the output of the white paper and the survey on actually how can we demonstrate that what we are doing in the software and how everything works together, how can we show that it has an impact on time, because maybe that is one route of then flowing that through to how that then has an impact on funding. So I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about EdGen in a minute, but there's some stuff that we can talk about there that we really think has some massive time savings, which reduces stress levels, which gives you the right information at your fingertips to make those decisions. I think on the wellbeing front, obviously COVID has accelerated that as wellbeing has jumped up the agenda, and more than the immediate safeguarding, but actually how do you actually monitor the overall health of all of those that are within the school community, and how do you track that and push that through? That came out loud and clear in the survey, where actually there's a collection of products out there with with lots of people doing point solutions, but there isn't really a single solution that pulls it together. There's bits in your MIS, there's bits in your safeguarding software, there's bits in your kind of video conferencing software, or in your filtering software, and it's all a bit scattergun and a bit distributed. So I think certainly some thinking is going on now in how do you bring that together, and how do you bring that whole wellbeing piece together so that there's a single view of that across the school and across the multi-academy trust.
Yeah, that's it. That's really interesting, actually, because you're right. I think ultimately the well-being, the safeguarding, all these elements are, it's a big subject, isn't it? It's a much bigger subject really than having individual solutions to solve in any individual point. Because safeguarding encapsulates anything from gross sort of abuse, all the way down to as you just said with COVID, all the way to well-being, where just mental health and feeling enabled to be able to learn. It goes down as far as that, really. So there's quite an extremity between the two things.
Yeah, and it's not an education thing, right? So this affects business, this affects way local communities form and work together, and how we look after those that are more vulnerable, and those that are potentially on their own, and obviously it affects the education community. So we, as a company that focuses on education but also has sectors elsewhere, particularly in the HR space, and where we have lots of software presence, actually bringing together those experiences is really helping us think about that in a wider context. Not much to talk about yet as to how we might solve that and how we might work with people on how we solve that, but I think in the same way that blended learning is likely to be here to stay, I think we can be pretty certain that overall well-being and the awareness of mental health issues caused by kind of long periods of absence from the community, whether that's your school community or your local community, I think is going to be something that we'll watch at both company commercial level as well as kind of within education. So more to follow in that space.
Cool.